I don't want my kids to grow up in a world where there are no commercial fishermen on the Hudson, where it's all Gordon Seafood and Unilever in 400-ton factory trawlers 100 miles offshore stripping and mining the ocean with no interface with humanity or with our communities. And I don't want my kids to grow up in a world where there are no family farmers in America, where, it's all Smithfield and Cargill and Premium Standard Farms raising animals in factories and warehouses and treating their stock and their workers and their neighbors with unspeakable cruelty and externalizing their costs by dumping their manure into our waters and streams and soils and air. And, and putting out of business every family farmer in America, which is what they're doing. And they're driving the final nail into the coffin of Thomas Jefferson's vision of an American democracy rooted in tens of thousands of independent freeholds, owned by family farmers, each with a stake in our system of government, the same as Walmart's doing to our small grocery stores and locally owned and regionally owned grocery stores. And I don't want my kids to grow up in a world where we paved the landscapes and lost touch with the seasons and the tides and the things that connect us to the 10,000 generations of human beings that were here before there were laptops and that connect us ultimately to God. And I don't believe that nature is God or that we ought to be worshiping it as God. But I do believe that it's the way that God communicates to us most forcefully. And God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great books of those religions, through wise people, and through art and literature and music and poetry, but nowhere with such force and clarity and texture and detail and grace and joy as through creation. We don't know Michelangelo by reading his biography. We know him by looking at the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And we know our Creator best by immersing ourselves in creation, and particularly wilderness, which is the undiluted work of the Creator. And that's what you have access to out here. This is wilderness. And, if you look at every religious tradition throughout the history of mankind, the central epiphany always occurs in the wilderness. Buddha had to go to the wilderness to experience nirvana and self-realization. Muhammad had to go to the wilderness of Mount Hera in 609 on a camping trip with his family, climb to the summit in the middle of the night and wrestle the angel Gabriel there to have the Quran squeezed from him. Moses had to go to the wilderness of Mount Sinai alone for 40 days to get the commandments. The Jews had to spend 40 years wandering the wilderness to purge themselves of the 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Christ had to go to the wilderness for 40 days alone to discover his divinity for the first time. His mentor was John the Baptist, who lived in a cave in the Jordan Valley and dressed in the skins of wild beasts and ate locusts and honey. And all of Christ's parables were taken from nature. I am the vine, you are the branches, the mustard seed, the little swallows, the scattering the seeds on the fallow ground, the lilies of the field. He called himself a fisherman, a farmer, a vineyard keeper, a shepherd. The reason he did that was that's how he stayed in touch with the people. And it's the same reason why all the Old Testament, the Talmud prophets, and the Talmudic prophets, the Quranic prophets, the Upanishad prophets, all the way back to the pagan prophets like Aesop, all of them came out of the wilderness. And all of them used parables and allegories and fables drawn from nature to teach us the difference, as morality plays, to teach us the difference between right and wrong and what the face of God looks like. And the reason they did that was that's how they stayed in touch with the people. Because all of them were revolutionaries. They were all, without exception, they were challenging the religious fundamentalism of their own time. And, Christ was constantly, his principal mission was challenging religious fundamentalism. He was going, constantly rebuking the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, who were the Jerry Falwells and Pat Robertsons of his day, for binding up heavy burdens for other men to carry, and to, for enriching themselves, impoverishing widows and orphans, and he said to his followers, this misses the whole point of religion. Religion is a search for existential truths, and that kind of fundamentalism is somebody who says it's all the truth you need to know is in this book, and I'm going to tell you what it means. And he told his followers, you don't have to pay attention to all these rules and regulations. He said, don't worry about the Sabbath. And you can violate that. He said, the rules were made for man. Man was not made for the rules. He said, don't worry about the prescriptions about what you can eat and you can't eat. He said, it's not what you put in your body that makes you unclean. It's how you conduct your lives, whether you conduct lives of mercy and generosity and kindness to others, and whether you embrace your enemy as you would your friend, and whether you embrace poverty and the poor. And that's what gets you close to God. And, ultimately it was the fundamentalists who murdered him. And the reason he used parables was because everything he said, like all the other prophets, contradicted what the common people heard from the literate, sophisticated people of their time. And they would have dismissed him as a quack. But they were able to confirm the wisdom of his parables through their own observations of the fishes and the birds. And they were able to say, he's not telling us something new. He's simply illuminating something very, very old, messages that were written into creation by the Creator at the beginning of time. And we haven't been able to discern or decipher them until the prophets came along who had immersed themselves in the wilderness and learned its language and come back to the cities to teach us the wisdom of God. And, this is where our values come from, the overarching values that unite all of humanity. And our national values in this country as well are so rooted in nature and particularly wilderness. Frederick Jackson, from the beginning of our national history, our greatest political leaders and philosophers and theologians were telling them, and writers and poets were telling the American people, you don't have to be ashamed because you don't have the 1,500 years of culture that they have in Europe, because you have this relationship to the land. And that's going to be the source of your values, your virtues, your character as a people. Frederick Jackson Turner, our greatest American historian, said that in America, democracy came out of the forest. Without these vast tracts of wilderness and woodland, we wouldn't have evolved the political system that defines us as a people. And if you look at every valid piece of classic American literature and poetry and art, the unifying theme is that nature is the critical defining element of American culture. And these are the things that we're fighting for. This is where our values are rooted. All the values of our democracy, of equity, of justice, of sustainability, of responsibility to our children. They're all rooted in how we care for these resources. And so the battle that we're fighting is not just, and law and justice. It's not just a battle, to bring one polluter to heel, but it's a battle that symbolizes all of the things. It's an investment in the best that we have in our country. And it's an investment in America, and it's an investment in the community. And so I want to thank the North Sound Baykeeper for all of the wonderful work that they've done in keeping the lantern burning and fighting for all of these values and all of these rights and for sustainable communities and dignified communities. And I want to thank all of you for the support you've given for this wonderful and noble effort. Thank you very much. Thank you.